You've likely encountered the increasingly vocal and frankly disturbing narrative blaming the Fulani people for a wide range of Nigeria's problems.
Yeah, from, economic instability to the insecurity that so many are facing, it's everywhere.
It is. And it casts this huge ethnic group as the problem. The source we're diving into today, Emeka Obasi's piece, Don't Blame the Fulani, really sounds an alarm.
A serious one.
Hmm.
He mentions the potential dangers, even drawing that chilling parallel to Rwanda.
Exactly. So our goal here is to really examine this narrative using the historical facts Obasi lays out in his article.
Because understanding the actual history, not just the rhetoric, is crucial, right?
Huh.
Especially for Nigerians at home and, well, everywhere.
Absolutely. We need to get past these generalizations if we want a more accurate, maybe even more peaceful understanding. Okay, let's unpack this.
Right. So the core of Obasi's argument directly tackles this idea, this narrative of Fulani domination.
And he's pretty forceful about it.
He is. He basically contends that the historical evidence, particularly in the military, just doesn't support that claim. Not in the way that explains today's issues anyway.
And he doesn't shy away from strong comparisons either, does he?
Yeah.
Bringing up the 1966 Igbo massacres, the Civil War.
Right off the bat, it's a stark reminder about collective blame and where it can lead. Blaming a whole group for what a few might have done. Yeah. It's dangerous territory.
A really crucial warning. So how does he start building his case against this idea of long-standing military dominance?
Well, he goes right back to the beginning. Independence, 1960. And he looks at the very top brass in the army.
Okay, so who was at the top then?
He points out that, yes, the highest-ranking Fulani officer was Hassan Usman Katsina. But, and this is key, the most senior officers overall, Wellington Bassey, Agoyeransi, Ademilagan, Ogundipe Shudende, they were all from the South.
Ah, okay, so not exactly a northern-dominated top tier at independence then.
Not according to this analysis. And Obasi notes these senior Southern guys were often commissioned from the ranks, rose up through service.
Interesting. So experience-based promotions. What about the early northern officers? He mentions Asare Maimalari.
Yes, Maimalari is significant. First Nigerian trained at Sandhurst, the prestigious British military academy.
Aye.
But again, Obasi stresses Maimalari was a northerner, yes, but Kanuri, not Fulani. He even gives his commissioning ID, N5 went over in 1950. Details matter here.
They do. It paints a more complex picture than just North versus South or one group dominating.
Exactly. And he continues that theme, listing other early Northern Sandhurst graduates, Kuru Muhammad, Aboga Larjma, both 1952, Yakubu Pam in 54, and Yakubu Gowon in 55.
And the point is?
None of them were Fulani either. So the early Northern intake at Sandhurst was itself ethnically diverse.
Okay, got it. So where does Hassan Usman Katsina, the Fulani officer, fit into this Sandhurst picture?
He went later, starting January 57. His ID was N36. And Obasi notes his course mate was Anthony Is from the East.
And comparing that to Gowon's or Pam's course mates?
It reinforces the diversity. Gowon was there with Anwuna, Madibo, Akochem, Wooden Megby, Pam with George Karubo. It shows a mix of people from different regions, different backgrounds in those formative years.
Right. So the foundation wasn't dominated by a single ethnic group. Then things shift dramatically with the 1966 coup.
A massive turning point. Obasi explains how the assassinations of Maimalari, Muhammad, Larjama, Pam, those prominent non-Fulani northern officers we just mentioned, their deaths suddenly made Gowon, who's in Gus, the most senior northern officer remaining.
So the coup itself, by targeting specific non-Fulani northerners, inadvertently elevated Gowon. How does that relate to the Fulani domination idea?
Well, it shows the power shift wasn't towards a Fulani officer, even in that chaotic moment.
Yeah.
INC then appointed Gowon as army chief.
And then IRNC himself was assassinated.
Exactly. And Lilskal Gowon takes over as head of state and commander-in-chief. Obasi makes a big point that he bypassed many more senior officers to do this.
Yeah, you read out that list earlier. Ogundepe, Way, Adebayo, Nwawo, Ijor. Quite a few senior figures were skipped over. It really highlights the instability.
It does. And crucially, once Gowon was in power, what did he do with key appointments? Specifically, Chief of Army Staff.
Did he appoint Katsina, the senior Fulani officer?
No. According to Obasi, he overlooked Katsina. First, he appointed Joseph Akahan, who was Tiv. After Akahan died, he appointed Elia Basala, also not Fulani.
So even with a northerner as head of state, the top army job didn't automatically go to a Fulani officer?
That's the argument. It suggests factors beyond just ethnicity were at play. Obasi does say Katsina eventually got the role, possibly due to pressure.
Oh.
But then after the war, he was moved to Deputy Chief of Staff, Supreme Headquarters, and David E. Jor became Army Chief. So it wasn't a long and uninterrupted tenure.
It sounds much more complex than a simple narrative allows. What about during the Civil War itself? The field commanders, the GOCs?
Another key point from Obasi. He argues Gawan made sure no Fulani officer held a GOC position during the war.
Really? Who are the GOCs then?
He lists them. Muhammad Shua, who was Kanuri, Murtala Muhammad Afenmai, Benjamin Adekunle and Obasanjo, both Yoruba, Ibrahim Haruna Garkida, Gibson Jallo, Pachama.
Wow. That's quite a diverse list commanding the divisions during Nigeria's most critical conflict.
It definitely challenges the idea of Fulani officers dominating the key fighting commands at that time.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because Obasi doesn't stop there. He carries this analysis forward post-Civil War through different regimes.
He does. Under Murtala, for instance, Yakubu Danjuma, whose Jukun was army chief, Ilia Bisala, again, not Fulani, was defense minister, the GOCs. Akinrinade, Martin Adamu, Abisoye, also not Fulani.
So a consistent pattern or lack thereof continues.
That seems to be his argument. Even looking at Buhari's first time as head of state, a Fulani leader, Obasi suggests others, like Babendai and Ibrahim Afa, had significant influence on military postings, especially once Tunde Iji Agbon, also Fulani, became number 2. So not just one person calling all the shots based on ethnicity.
More complex power dynamics. And then under Babangida himself.
Obasi emphasizes this. None of Babangida's army chiefs were Fulani. He lists them all: Abacha, Salihu Ibrahim, Gusau, Chris Ali, Khizir, Ishaya Bamai. That's a long stretch.
That really does seem to contradict the idea of sustained Fulani control at the very top of the army during that era.
It does. Then Abdul Salami Abubakar kept Bamai on. Then comes Obasanjo's presidency.
And his army chiefs?
Victor Malutiv, Alexander Ogomudia Soko, Martin Luther Agwai, Southern Kaduna, Away Azazi Yazan. Again, 0 Fulani appointments to that specific top role.
The pattern, or rather the lack of a Fulani pattern, seems pretty consistent across different administrations, north and south. What about under Jonathan?
Similar story. Started with Azubuike Ejirika, who's Igbo, then Abdul Rahman Bamzau, who Obasi notes was replaced, then Kenneth Minima from Opobo. Damazau had briefly taken over after Luka Yusuf passed away.
So again, diversity shifts, but no singular ethnic dominance in that role. What about the Fulani presidents themselves, Shagari and Yaradua? That seems like a key test case.
A very key test case. And Obasi highlights that Shagari appointed Alani Akinrinade, a Yoruba, and then Muhammad Wushishi, who wasn't Fulani. Yarduda appointed Luka Yusuf from southern Kaduna.
So even when the presidents were Fulani, they appointed non-Fulani officers as chief of army staff?
According to Obasi's account, yes. That's a powerful counterpoint to the narrative he's challenging.
Okay, bringing it closer to the present, Buhari's second term as elected president.
Right. He appointed Tukur Buratai as Army Chief. Buratai is Bura, not Fulani. Obasi does express a view that Nigerians were somehow deceived around this time.
In what way?
Well, he flags other appointments, Demazau as Minister of Interior, Hamid Ali at Customs. He connects these roles, held by Northerners, though Demazau is Fulani, Ali is not, to the control over borders, movement of people, inflow of arms.
So suggesting that even if the army chief wasn't Fulani, other strategic security posts related to border control were relevant to the insecurity situation.
That seems to be the implication he's drawing there. It's a slightly different angle, looking beyond just the COAS role.
And now, under President Tinubu,
Obasi just notes the current situation. A Yoruba Chief of Army Staff, Yoruba Heads of Customs and Immigration, Yoruba Minister of Internal Affairs.
showing another shift, another configuration.
Exactly. It illustrates the fluidity, how the ethnic makeup of these key posts changes with administrations. No permanent lock by any single group is the point he's making throughout.
So summing up Obasi's whole argument based on this detailed walk through military history,
It's that the historical record just doesn't support this narrative of long-standing dominant Fulani control over the military, and therefore blaming them collectively for Nigeria's deep-seated problems, especially in security, is fundamentally flawed and unfair.
and dangerous. He comes back to that warning. He explicitly mentions concern over what he calls the heinous open border policy under the previous APC government, linking it to the influx of unknown gunmen.
Yes, and he finishes with this plea, really, to separate ordinary innocent Fulani people from this blanket blame, to avoid collective punishment.
It's a powerful conclusion based on that historical evidence. What really stands out for you from all this?
What's fascinating here, I think, is how a narrative, this idea of Fulani domination, can gain so much traction, become so widespread, despite the historical evidence, as presented by Obasi, pointing in a different direction.
It really
It
does.
just underscores how vital it is to actually look at the facts, to avoid these kinds of sweeping generalizations, especially when ethnic identity is involved. It's just too sensitive.
Absolutely. And hopefully, this deep dive looking closely at Abbasi's points has given you, our listeners, a clearer picture. Maybe cut through some of that noise with a more grounded perspective.
Because the danger of scapegoating is real. The article warns about it directly, and history, sadly, has shown us where that can lead if it's left unchallenged. It can fuel real-world violence.
It truly can.
Which leads to, I suppose, a crucial question for you listening. How can we, collectively, make sure that historical accuracy and a more nuanced understanding win out over these harmful, simplistic generalizations in our national conversation? When we talk about identity security, who's to blame?
That's the challenge, isn't it? So what does this all mean? I think it means critical thinking, really making the effort to seek out facts and being willing to look beyond those easy, often divisive narratives.
Yeah.
It's just more crucial than ever for Nigeria's future.